Welcome back to the Property Finance Podcast. So today I want to talk about valuations. So valuations is probably one of the most catalytic subjects that we get. I mean, it winds everyone up. They never quite know what the valuations are going to be, never quite know what to expect. And I want to caveat this heavily early on that I'm not a valuer by any stretch of the imagination. So a lot of this is just coming off of personal experience and some of the stuff we're seeing from lenders and investors and everything else. So the first one I want to talk about is probably the biggest one and the one that forever is going around social media and forever all of the events that you're at, and it's HMO valuations. And it's that thing of how do I actually get a commercial valuation on an HMO? And we have spent years, and I mean years, dealing with lenders, investors, developers, valuers, whoever we can come across, and trying to understand from them, what are they looking for when going for a commercial valuation? And the one thing that comes out of all of this is when the valuer goes to the property, they are looking for, is this a house? Is this a commercial property? And the way they define it as a commercial property is essentially, if you walked into that, could a family move into it tomorrow? So some of the things that stop that from being able to happen are things like putting en suites in all the bedrooms. Because realistically, if you put that on the market, what family is going to want to purchase something that's got an ensuite in the front room or the dining room or whatever? So that's always a big help straight off the bat. Anything that's got planning for an HMO, so anything that's C4 planning use, realistically, again, a family's put off by that because they're going to have to go and get C3 planning use. They're going to then have to do all of these different bits and pieces before they can move into it. It's very, very off-putting. Also, having planning permission for C4, it just gives lenders and valuers a bit more confidence that actually you're looking for that investment valuation and that your market is investors. And then the other thing that they kind of look for is anything over 6 bedrooms as well. Because if you're 4, 5 bedrooms, you're kind of in that weird in-between stage. Anything less than 4 bedrooms, it's always going to be a bricks and mortar valuation realistically. So we sort of spent all this time dealing with HMO valuers and lenders and everything else. And that seems to be the feedback that we always get is 6 beds all en suites, 7+ bedrooms, always seem to be the ones that you're getting that commercial valuation on. And essentially what they do is they take that gross annual rent and then they look to apply a sort of comparable yield as to what's sort of sold nearby. It's all done off comparables. As long as there are lots of comparables sort of within a small vicinity, although saying that, we've had HMOs in Northampton that have been compared to HMOs in Leicester, which was a bizarre transaction, and still to this day don't quite know what the valuer was thinking at that point. But as long as there's plenty of comparables, you can have a fairly good idea of what the property is going to be valued at. And the other thing as well is if you're getting into HMOs as a development project, for example, so we've got one at the moment where the client bought the property, then got development finance, converted it into a 14-bed HMO, had a valuation carried out at the point that she got the development finance, and then has then used that valuer again for the HMO mortgage. So 14 beds, it's always going to be a commercial valuation. But actually, this is more around having that stability throughout the transaction of having the same valuer again and again. So there is that way of being able to approach lenders and actually request that the valuation that was done previously is used for the long-term finance as well. So that's HMO valuations. Then when it comes to SA and holiday lets, there again is a misconception that you're going to get an investment valuation. We have never, ever, ever seen an investment valuation on a serviced accommodation unit. Purely the reason being is because if you're doing flats or holiday lets or whatever it may be, for all intents and purposes, that flat is just a flat. If the fact you've chosen to put a holiday let in there or serviced accommodation in there, it's not purpose-built holiday let, it's not purpose-built serviced accommodation. It is just a flat that you have decided to go and put holiday let into. So it's always going to be bricks and mortar. The only time we've seen it any different is where we've gone to a lender where you've maybe had holiday let in there for 2-3 years or service accommodation in there for 2 or 3 years, and they've actually then been able to go off of a multiplier of EBITDA. The problem being is that actually the multiplier they use for the EBITDA is normally so low that actually your bricks and mortar trumps it anyway. So I would say when it comes to service accommodation, I would just err on the side of caution. Unless you've got literally usage of a hotel, you're not going to get a commercial valuation. So it really is a case of look at it. It's bricks and mortar all day long. If you could use it as a family home or anything like that, it's always going to be that bricks and mortar valuation. Then the last valuation I want to talk about is a residual valuation. So this is on development finance mainly. So this is where you're doing developments, whether it be commercial conversions or new build developments. This is one where you essentially want to try and work out what that land is worth or what you can afford to pay for that land. So what valuers tend to do is they work out the GDV. So based on comparables, this is what the GDV is going to be. What they then do is then take off 20% developer's profit. They then take off your build costs, and then they potentially take off some finance costs as well. And what that does is once you do that calculation of GDV, less 20%, less your build costs, less financing costs, that then creates essentially an affordable cost for that land. So essentially what they're trying to work out is if that went on the open market, what could someone reasonably afford to pay for that land? And also it's a good exercise for you to do as well, because if you can work out what the GDV is, if you know what your build costs are, if you know what your financing costs are going to be, you can then come up with a figure, which then you can then offer that figure to the vendor and say, well, look, actually based on these calculations, this is what I can afford to pay. I'm only making 20% profit as opposed to 25%, because obviously sort of as until fairly recently, you were looking for 25% profit on GDV on development schemes, now pushing more for 20% profit because otherwise the market just wouldn't work. But you go through those numbers, you say to the vendor, right, look, I'm making 20% profit. Here are my build costs. Here are my financing costs. This is what I can afford to pay for this land. So residual valuations are very powerful for you as the client to then go and negotiate with the vendor, but they're also very handy for you to know from the lending perspective what the lenders are going to lend off of and what they're basing their valuation off as well. It's also handy as well if you're doing maybe a larger scheme of development. So for example, we've got one at the moment where there's 188 units on the site. They're only developing out 49 to begin with. It's very handy to know what the residual valuation is on the other 139 units. Pretty sure I got the maths right there, but who knows, on the other 139 odd units, because what you want to know is actually there's a value associated to that land. So when you go for development finance for the 49, for example, you then want to make sure, well, actually, what's the value of the land that's then left over, because it all goes into the same pack together with the lender. And that residual valuation of those remaining units may be what changes you having to put in a large sum of money to begin with, or not putting any money in at all. So the larger schemes, again, those residual valuations are handy to know if you're maybe phasing the development. So hopefully that gives you an idea in terms of valuations, what you're looking at for HMO, what you're looking at for SA, and then also residual valuations as well. Hopefully that's been handy. Thank you very much for listening. I will catch you on the next one.